My name is Dr. Emily Ridge, and I'm currently the work package 2 lead on the CLS Infra project. I've taken over from Justin Tundra, who's seconded to another role temporarily, at least. So I'm delighted to welcome everybody to this Transnational Access Fellowship talk. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Haimo Stiemer here for 6 weeks. And he's going to be sharing some of his research today. He works on the intersection between modernism, sociology, and computational literary studies. And his TNA project that he's working on at the moment concerns 2 journals from the Weimar Republic, one related to expressionism and the other related to new objectivity. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the titles. You could probably help me out a little bit later. I'll butcher them. But the paper today comes out of that research. So his paper is called The Clash of the Modernists, Periodicals as an Object of Research in Literary Studies. And the talk will be about 30 to 40 minutes. And then we will hopefully have some time for questions at the end. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, many thanks for the introduction, Emily. And before we get started, I also would like to thank you all for your interest, which I'm very pleased about, and which must be particularly strong in the front of the upcoming Easter holidays, I think. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope even more I can give you an interesting sight into my research. And this research is, as already mentioned, as you can see on the slide, about periodicals, especially literary periodicals. And well, I know periodical is an umbrella term, so I don't speak about daily newspaper. I talk about magazines and journals, and what we can do with them in literary studies. And as I come from the field of computational literary studies, it is also that computational methods that I will be discussing. And yeah, and this all against the background, as already mentioned, of modernist research, and using the example of 2 German language periodicals. The one is Der Sturm, the storm in English, an expressionist magazine, and the other one is in German, Der Querschnitt, in English, counter section, and it's from the literary movement of new objectivity, as mentioned, and is specifically German and Dutch literary movement during the Weimar Republic. Yes, so here's the agenda of my talk. Here's the agenda of my talk. No, here isn't. Here it is. At first, I'd like to speak about periodical studies in general. So what we are actually talking about when we say periodical or periodicals. This is not as easy as you might think it is. So I will talk about this. And yeah, what is the specific benefit for our research interests in humanities when we're dealing with periodicals? And afterwards, I want to talk briefly about my general approach to modernist research, which is drawn on Pierre Bourdieu's field theory, and Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist who died 2002. And I want to make it clear that Bourdieu's concepts are very close to what is known as material modernism, and why Bourdieu's concepts and material modernism are adequate or very good approaches for analyzing periodicals. This will be followed by discussion of research methods, and finally I will talk about the examples and the first results of my work here in Galway. So, periodicals and literary studies. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about periodicals? First of all, we can state that periodical studies have rapidly gained in importance, especially in the last 20 years. This has to do with the fact that many archives and libraries digitized their collections on a massive scale during this time. And so the access to these media has become much more easier. And at the same time, the question what exactly a journal is or a magazine is became urgent. And one answer or one suggestion is from Emil Dovifat's important book in the German-speaking world, was published in the 1930s, entitled Zeitungslehre, in English, Newspaper Theory, and it is as follows in my translation. The magazine is a printed work published continuously and in regular sequence, which serves a limited field of activity or a separate presentation of material, like image or editing. Well, this definition provides a broad framework, however, and it generates also problems. And this concerns all three criteria, central criteria here. The first criterion, or the second, continuously. Some encyclopedias or multi-volume works are also published on an ongoing basis, especially if they are distributed by subscription. And of course, we do not refer to these media as journals or periodicals. This is particularly the case with historical journals from the 18th century, I think. This criterion, regular sequence. Some journals, including some of the most important in literary history, such as, for example, Fackel by Karl Kraus, are written mainly by, were published very irregular at times. So Karl Kraus have put it in casual sequence. And the third criterion, mainly historical journals, were also produced and distributed in handwritten form. So these were, of course, small print runs, but in the history of periodicals, this did happen. So it is not so easy to find a good definition for magazines, of course, and yet we have a fairly precise idea of what they are. And that has not only to do with the function, which consists of occupying a specific limited field of knowledge, but it also has to do with their form. Yeah, if you see a journal, you know it's one and it's not a book. We are dealing with objects that require specific ways of reading and consist of specific elements in a complex text image structure. And before talking about a fragmentary and not linear reading, which jumps between different text forms and design elements, a reading that has to combine different elements, sometimes even between different issues of the magazines, and this is the case with serializations. In spite of the difficulties, in my opinion, it is very fruitful to take a closer look to periodicals. Why? Magazines represent the real communication processes of their time. Through them, we can find out exactly how things developed. Books usually only tell us the results of processes. Here we can follow them directly. In literary studies, when we talk about a certain period of time, we often do so on the basis of the authors and texts that have made it into the canon. However, this usually has little to do with the real contemporary literary conditions. When we reconstruct the period by means of magazines, we learn something about the real literary conditions of the time. In other words, we do not examine this period ex post on the basis of the results at the end of a literary communication, but on the basis of the course of the literary communication itself. This is also the reason why periodicals are called time capsules. Let me come back to the point that history is written by winners, and this brings us to Bourdieu. His work, Rules of Art, first published in 1992, is, in my opinion, an important work for understanding literary modernism. Bourdieu assumes that the literary world, as we know it today, was established towards the end of the 19th century, and Bourdieu speaks about the constitution of the literary field with relative autonomy. What is literature and what is good literature is from then on largely defined by the players in the field themselves. This is where the idea of l'art pour l'art, or art for art's sake, takes shape. The goal is an art that is self-sufficient and does not make itself useful to any external purpose. Not for enlightenment, not for entertainment, not for commercial success, and so on, or any particular political idea. This is a central idea of modern literature and leads to a variety of aesthetics experiments. The development of literature is dependent on the struggles of the players in the field, on the struggles between authors, publishers, literary critics, and the institutions associated with them, including magazines. One becomes visible in the field by taking a position that is defined in relation to other positions. And this happens through form. This is not about what an author writes about, topic, subject, etc. It's about how they write. The form is a message that distinguishes it from the other positions in the field. Put it simply, the struggles in the field can only be understood if one not only grasps the explicit polemics, but also takes into account the different types of writing and the different aesthetics as implicit position takings. The fact that form always has a meaning is also a central statement of material modernism. As George Bornstein put it, material modernism highlights the notion of material textuality as both the physical features of the text that carry semantic weight and the multiple forms in which texts are physically created and distributed. While social relations are meaningful in Bourdieu's work, the immediate physical surroundings and realization of the text take central stage here. The text as text is semantically formatted, we could say, by its physical environment. For us researchers, the bibliographic coding of the text is therefore important. The page layout, the ink, the paper, the spacing between the elements, the prefixes, are all important. A decisive finding for periodical studies. We don't just want to analyze the content of the journals, we can only understand how journals behave as actors in the field if we take their bibliographic code into account. The agenda behind the bibliographic coding or code. But yeah, how exactly can we analyze this? It must be mentioned that, alas, there are only a few computational workflows for analyzing periodicals. Most computational methods are oriented towards text analysis. Periodicals, however, as shown, are very complex objects for analysis. I have therefore tried a classical computational approach and a new approach. However, the latter doesn't really work yet, I have to say, but here are my first results. Here you can see at first the very different research interests in regards to journals and periodicals, literature in journals, historical journal as a medium, and information acquisition. Well, this is very interdisciplinary. And yes, from a literary studies perspective, this is most likely about the content of the journals, but as already mentioned, it is also about the media-specific form. So firstly, the content. I chose a simple approach with regard to the content profile of the periodicals. Explore the journals semantically and lexically using the Dorn-Seif dictionary. More on this in a moment. It should be first noted in an excursus that the Storm is an expressionist periodical, while the Querschnitt is a new objectivity periodical. And in research, German expressionism is said to have highly valued the notion of action. is often about the individual who forms his environment out of his own power. New objectivity, on the other hand, is seen in research as a counter movement to expressionism, which chooses simple everyday language. New objectivity's themes are considered to be an appreciation of technology, fashion, and mass culture. Now to my approach and to Dornsife. Dornsife does not organize the entire German vocabulary alphabetically, but by subject groups. Each entry thus presents a plethora of words of all word types that belong to the respective subject or term. Based on the research literature, I have selected the following subject groups from the Dornsife dictionary: will, strong-willed, and vigor for expressionism. In German Wille, entschlossen und Tatkraft. And then I made some adjustments, and words from the subject groups in the translation include, for example, activity, endurance, assertiveness, commitment, performance, capacity, willpower, effectiveness, hardness, condition, strength, active person, energetic, powerful, busy, led, and so on. The modified subject group then contained 57 words. I then used the concordance program AntConc to detect the word occurrences from the modified subject word group in two subcorpora. Subcorpus formed from the 36 issues of the 1912 volume of Der Sturm and from 14 issues of the 1924 and 1925 volumes of Der Querschnitt. I then calculated the relative frequency of the words belonging to the subject group in the two corpora in relation to the total corpus. The hypothesis is that the frequent representation of words from subject groups indicates the extent to which the semantic lexical field attributable to expressionism is represented by the two journals. So, in a way, I have also scrutinized the research. As expected, the modified subject group is most strongly represented in the Storm. However, the figures for the Querschnitt are not low either. What is pending is the application of other subject groups for this method. This approach must be revised again in any case. There's also the question which other subject groups could be used for the analysis. The second approach for analyzing periodicals, which I'm currently working on, is the adaptation of an automatic text image recognition system developed in the Revistas Culturales 2.0 project at the University of Augsburg. The idea is to use a quantitative image text analysis to determine the proportion of images and text in the periodicals. The hypothesis is that the two magazines differ significantly in this respect, and that this is related to the magazine's programs. The method used for medieval manuscripts has already been adapted for Spanish magazines, but as I said, I'm still working on that at the moment. So, here it is, the example of automatic text image recognition. And so you can separate, so you have an idea, is there an increase of images in the Querschnitt in comparison to the Storm, der Sturm. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think we have plenty of time for questions, so I'll open the floor. Adrian.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I'm intrigued by the definitions. You spent some time, and rightly, I think, considering what we might consider a periodical.
Yeah.
And the complicated nature of that definition that is, we might assume that we know what it is, but actually at the edges, it's quite difficult to understand. I was interested by the kind of word groupings that you're using for your analysis, or perhaps initially using for your analysis. I think you said it might be revised in various ways, which is understandable. That one was, in a sense, one journal was expressionist and one was new objective in most general terms. And journals, as you know very well, and Bourdieu talks about, are the product of so many different people, so many different agencies, not just people, but money and printing facilities and availability and all these things. So I'm interested by those. I know that they're familiar terms and well-used terms, particularly in German literary criticism, but I'm interested by the fact that they could be seen as quite general and also have some of the same definitional problems as even a periodical would have. But expressionists covers an awful lot of different art forms, never mind just literary studies. And at the edges, it might do all sorts of different things, and different actors might have different kind of motivations and groups, completely different kinds of art appearing in the same journals. So I'm wondering if you could say more about the process of definition of those, how you choose a term that's, after all, one has to accept, I assume, the term expressionist in some way, but is problematic in lots of ways, and then go from that to your groupings of particular sets of vocabulary, which is obviously a way of trying to delineate that. I mean, it strikes me that it's at least possible that we'll come up with the results one wanted, in a sense. If you say that expressionism is about will and these other things, then you might discover that it is. And so I'm just interested by the process of how you choose those words, how you choose those kind of definitions, and what do you do about the problems of definition around the edges? Because you spoke about it so well, even that simple term periodical, which you think we understand, we don't understand so well. Those are more complicated, fugitive terms. So I'm wondering how you do those kind of things. That makes sense?
Yeah, I got it. Okay. No open options. Okay. Well, the question is, it was first just an experimental approach, and I think it it makes more sense if you add more subject groups and compare it with the first one. So you have research. How do you say in English? You have your research about expressionism, and this research says there is the notion of vigor and of action-oriented program in expressionism, and so it makes sense that the Sturm, which is a programmatical periodical, also represents this notion. And but what you can see here is that also the Querschnitt has also a representation of this subject group. So that's interesting. But it was the first part of this approach, and I will combine it with the other subject groups. And so you can test the research we have about expressionism and which subjects, which semantic subject groups are represented by the different periodicals.
I mean, early days, obviously, but part of what you're doing maybe is problematizing those terms, in fact, that you might discover that actually the second journal, the Querschnitt, has as many, the Querschnitt, yes, has as many terms about will or nature or mass culture or something as their Sturm, and that might actually question the validity of those two terms, which I think is probably likely that, that those terms are not going to stand up to scrutiny in individual cases, although one maybe find general patterns, I suppose. But the patterns could be, it's 20 years after a start, there may be other reasons for the patterns, not just artistic ones, vocabulary changes and uses of vocabulary changes. So,
yeah. I think the patterns are interesting. So we can see we can have other subject groups and see mass culture, for example. Perhaps there is a connection between the images of or the commercial images, something like that, and we can then share it with each other. And then I think the patterns might be interesting. But yes, it was. Thank you very much.
That's the end of the question.
Yeah, but you're right. The first is that we have our opinions about these periods or about these literary movements, but we can test it. We can try to find our patterns. We don't discuss actually. We actually don't discuss now. Yeah.
Do you want to jump in?
This time I don't know a lot, or basically nothing at all about digitization issues. But I wonder, would something like the word cloud help with that? Could you not just fill in the text and then exclude the modal verbs and particles and articles, and then see what are the 100 most frequent nouns or verbs, then compare that with another periodical?
This is also an option. Yeah, and also you can do it with the concordance program. And yes.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I am coming from a completely different field and have very little knowledge of this, but I was actually curious about if you go to like the word, like where it had the list of words, some of those words were actually kind of surprising to me because I was like completely, I study law. I don't know anything about this, but I was actually surprised where it said like lad and manly and all of these things. And I was wondering if there's any like gender component to what you're looking at in terms, maybe I missed it, in terms of like masculinities or something, because it could be very interesting to kind of see what people thought of these words and how they understood them at the time. And actually, I think that your like computational approach could be very interesting in kind of mapping where these words appeared and maybe trying to make like conclusions from studying the texts and all of that. So
the gender aspect might be very interesting in comparison just to new objectivity, because in new objectivity we have das neue Fräulein-Wunder, the empowerment of women in this time. And lad, for example, is from this subject group 9.35 Tatkraft. Yeah, it's so power, man. Well, it's an yeah, it's from this subject. But yeah, if you take this perspective, it would be also very interesting.
Especially, especially if you look at these different like periodicals in that time period. Especially, well, I don't know if you were focused on I don't remember if you said you were focused on the 20s or 30s, but leading up to the Nazi takeover, that could be really fascinating.
Yeah, this is a time for new objectivity until 1933. Yes.
So what I was going to ask Haimo was whether you had thought about reversing this approach here. So taking the textual content of the journals and trying a topic modeling approach to see what kinds of topics are generated just from that text, and then those texts, and then seeing if they correlate with Dornzeif's categories, or whether that would be.
Of course, but in my opinion, the corpus is too small at this stage for topic modeling. But if it's it will grow, and so I can do that. Yeah.
I understand that you're concentrating on text, on words, and I'm not familiar with the two periodicals that you're looking at, but I'm wondering about the ratio of textual matter to image on the page, and how you might be able to investigate the prevalence of images or the sorts of images and the amount of space that an image takes on the page in terms of its importance.
Yeah, this is what I'm just working on, and it's a special workflow and implemented with Python and with this software workflow for automatic tagging of medievals, manuscript images. It doesn't work out now yet because yeah, there are some differences between this project and my project, so I have to adapt it, and it's not as easy as I thought it is. Yeah.
And then there's the.
I think it's very important for periodical for analyzing periodicals because as I already mentioned, if we are just looking at the content, don't get what a periodical really is and what the way we have to analyze it.
And then there's the question of the incidence of text within an image.
Yeah.
Or an image that's made up of text.
Yeah, very different.
It's the type of that kind of experimentation.
But I think in this way, you have to annotate the texts in the image afterwards. But yeah, looking forward.
So I just wanted to ask about the, you point out how convincingly how the digitization of these periodicals has opened up new ways of analyzing and examining them, as you kind of rightly illustrate in your talk. But I'm presuming you also have kind of handled these periodicals or in paper form, I'm guessing, or not.
The Sturm, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, because I'm just wondering how that kind of, because you talked about material modernisms earlier, and I'm wondering how that material encounter with the periodicals, does that kind of change the types of questions you might think about asking through the digital tools that you're using here or not? Or is it fine to just disregard our material engagement with these texts completely? Or does that, what are the pros and cons of that?
Intriguing question, a good question. Well, it depends on the metadata. I think in CLS we are just at the beginning of analyzing periodicals, and the quality of the metadata are very different. So some metadata have informations about what you are asking, the quality of the paper or what it feels like. But yeah, that's a challenge, I think, for the CLS approach.
And you said you kind of have handled the first, but not the second. Yeah. So did kind of seeing one in the flesh change, did you find yourself engaging in a different way with that journal than the one that you kind of encountered wholly in it digitally?
I'm not sure, but because if you go in a library and look at the magazine, it's also formatted in some way. It's formatted also in the digitized way, but also libraries put it together in books, the magazines or something like that. Yeah, it's not the pure way of reading it like they read it in the 1920s, I think. So there's a difference too. But the digitized version is, of course, the distance is bigger there.
On that note, I once kind of encountered a wartime exile periodical in the British Library bound up with a magazine called The Matrimonial Post, which was a matchmaking, it's the strangest juxtaposition. But so yeah, I agree with you.
So I'm intrigued by this approach at generating some digital statistics about the periodical. So I know you're just experimenting at the moment. Can you say what kinds of data you might hope that would yield, and how you might synthesize that with some of your analysis of the textual content?
A good question, but I don't know. I'm
just free to speculate wildly.
No, I don't. Well, I'm not sure if it really works. That's a question, because this is really for manuscripts, and if it works, I think there's a variety of there are many possibilities. So if you have any idea, I'm happy to hear about it.
I mean, I guess like a very raw proportion of text versus non-text or image or something like that would, you can begin to speculate about, you know, whether these are artistic images, whether they're, you know, conveying something artistic, whether they're advertising, those kinds of proportions, but, you know, without actually seeing them in individual images as opposed to just, you know, large-scale quantitative analysis. I don't know if there's much that it could possibly yield, aside from those raw proportions, unless you can find a tool that manages to do content analysis or very, very basic content analysis to indicate that, you know, this might be an advert, this might be an illustration, that kind of stuff. But I mean, those twin approaches do obviously fit with Bourdieu and the various sociologists of the text. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see how you can kind of operationalize that, right, in computational means. And what are the steps that you can take in order to investigate their concerns using computers?
What's the format of the page? Is it in columns, or is it set up as if it were a book? What does it look like? What's the page look like? On either of the periodicals that you've looked at?
The different journals.
Mm-hmm.
I think Querschnitt in books.
Looks like a book, so it's straight across, no columns, no separate spaces.
More than this, yes. More like a book.
Because there are people who are looking at book illustration and trying to analyze it, that you might be able to borrow some of their techniques.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to follow up very quickly on this. Sorry, Doug. I don't know if you've encountered Natalie Houston's work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
Yeah. That's
Natalie
Houston at Northwestern or Northeastern.
I think it's a consortium, but yeah, if you just put in Natalie Houston, yeah, they've done some really interesting things.
Of analysis,
illustrations
of spatial analysis of book pages, and
she works on Victorian periodicals.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hey, that was great, Haimo. Thanks very much. I was wondering, love your use of AntConc. I was wondering if you're using any other concordance software in your project, like DocuScope. I found DocuScope a really helpful way to both visualize as you're making concordance of questions. And so I just wondered if that was something you're also exploring. You know, different types of tools and software.
Which program?
It's called DocuScope.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, to put it bluntly, I teach with AntConc, so I use it.
Yeah, no, that's understandable.
I think it's very easy, yeah, it's usual to use in Germany, but I can try other and concordance programs.
Because I think it's a neat way to come at these problems from a different angle. You know, different types of software gives you types of systems to use, and it might allow you to pose some questions there. And yeah. Also, on that note about Victorian studies and periodicals, I was wondering how your project maps onto some of the computational or sort of corporeal analysis projects that come out in, say, journals in the English tradition, like the Journal of, I'm going to ruin this, Journal of Modernist Periodical Studies. Yes. I don't know if you're setting yourself against those studies or just taking solely a focus, obviously, on the Germanic material. I'm just wondering in terms of your methodological approach, if you're taking sort of the good bits from things that are happening in England, you know, and then seeing what you can do to really set the stage for your own research profile.
Yeah, I know this magazine. It's good, and I think there's no. I read it, and there are good articles in it. So, yeah, but as I mentioned, there are a few computational methods also.
That's why it's so exciting. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I think Andrew Thacker in the UK runs a big kind of, I think he's still running a big project on modernist magazines and periodicals. They've had different kind of stages, and I don't know where they're at now. I think they're looking at
Glasgow as well. I think,
yeah.
Middleburn culture kind of.
What's the name?
His name is Andrew Thacker. So he's been involved for quite a number of years, and I think they've published a big Oxford handbook of modernist magazines. But I think he's now looking. Last time I heard, like at more international scene, because I think they focused on maybe Anglophone journals, so he might be worth reaching out to as well. And I'm not sure to what degree they're engaging with CLS style methods either. So yeah. Any other?
There's another one in Ryerson University in Toronto, which is called Metropolitan Toronto University. They were given Yellow 90s, I think was the project called, but they're swishing into the 20th century. But they're doing this kind of thing. So they're little individual projects all over the world. I think that's part of the problem with this, isn't it? I mean, there's such diverse approaches and so isolating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So obviously this project that you're doing here for 6 weeks is quite self-contained, and you're looking at 2 journals here, but how do you see this project evolving into the future? Are you going to expand the scope a little bit?
If it works, of course, yes.
So this is an experiment.
Well, in the past, I worked a lot with metadata data, but not with the text image constructions and something like that. So yeah, it would be nice to expand it in this way.
Just check in to see if anybody has any questions online, or if anyone wants to jump in.
Could I just ask very quickly, opposite to Doug's question, what is the status of this kind of analysis of German periodicals? So is your approach novel and unique within the field of German periodical studies?
I think a lot of projects are dealing with newspapers, daily newspapers, and well, I think the digitization is in a very good way. So we have well, Anno, for example, in Vienna is a portal who has a lot of daily newspapers digitized, and so you can search, you can sift through the material, but analyzing, there are less projects, I think, who analyze magazines in this way. Yeah.
Well, I don't think there are any questions online last I looked, so I think it remains for me to thank you very much, Haimo, for coming along and sharing the really fascinating work you're doing here in Galway and into the future. And thanks everyone for coming and tuning in online as well. And I guess, I don't know if you want to share your email address. I know you were going to send something.
Your profile's up on the university webpage.
Yes, you should be able to. Well, thanks, Haimo. Thank you, everyone. And yeah.
Thank you very much.